Hello and welcome to another video to benefit Eve University. I'm Amoni Pinala. You might also know me as Zipporah Pinala or Camille Pinala, depending on when you met me, if you met me at Eve University. As I said, this is a class to benefit Eve University. I teach classes there, um, and I get a lot of requests to record the classes I'm teaching, but I don't want to put people on the spot because I know that people are asking questions they might be afraid are stupid questions and may feel self-conscious about asking those questions if they know that the class is being recorded. So instead, I record videos without a class and upload them to YouTube, and this is one of those. Now, I have done basically all of the core classes from the Eve University core curriculum, as well as several classes that I teach beyond the core curriculum. And today we're going to be talking about hauling. Now, this has some overlap with my Intro to Safe Traveling class, but this is going specifically in depth on hauling as opposed to simply safe traveling. So, if you haven't seen the Intro to Safe Traveling class, I highly recommend you watch that one as well. If you are interested in hauling, but but we'll talk about some of the same things in this class as well. So there's going to be some overlap in these classes. All right. So with that out of the way, let's talk about hauling. So in this class, we are going to be talking about what is hauling. We'll talk about the different types of hauling, um, with an emphasis on DSTs and freighters. That's going to be the bread and butter of hauling, at least for this class. Um, There are other types of hauling that we're just not going to go super in depth on. We are going to talk about the risks of hauling, particularly ganking, and how to reduce the risk. Um, and so, what is hauling? Hauling is moving cargo from one place to another. Simple as that, going from A to B with cargo. Um, and there are a number of things you need to think about if you are going to haul or if you are considering hauling. You need to take into account the volume of your cargo. We talk about cargo in terms of volume, that is meters cubed. Everything has a volume, and so um, you can have things that are uh, large volume, and you can have things of uh, small volume, right? You can also You also need to take into consideration the value of the item or items that you are hauling, because you can have things that are high volume, low value, right? And also low volume, high value, right? You do want to take into consideration your route, whether it's realistic for you to be able to get to from A to B, from one destination to another. That could be things like, is there a high sec to high sec route? Or do I have to go through low sec or even null sec? These things make it practically impossible to get from one place to another without um, without taking on significant risk, right? You also need to factor in how much time you have to haul, especially in freighters. It can be a time-consuming prospect to have to haul. Also, if you're hauling a long distance, even in it's something that aligns quickly or quicker, like a DST or a blockade runner, if you have to do 30, 40, or even 50 jumps, it's still going to be a very time-consuming thing. And there are no guarantees that you will get from one place to another safely. all you can do is reduce the risk or mitigate the risk. And so in this class, we are not talking about how to um, how to do it in a foolproof way. We are talking about understanding how to haul, what to use to haul, what the dangers are, and how to reduce those risks so that you can make an informed decision about how you're going to haul and if you're going to haul. So, we have a number of ships at our disposal to haul, and we're going to talk a little bit about most of these. The first is the sub 2 align fitted ship. Now that is represented here by the Synesis. The Synesis is a very popular option for sub 2 align hauling or a speed tank hauling. We have T1 haulers, and if you've taken my intro to safe traveling or you've watched the recording, you know that T1 haulers are great for moving from one spot in a system to another's, or maybe from one system to a neighboring system. But you never want to do any sort of long distance hauling because, well, we'll get into it. Um, There is the blockade runner, which is the first of our T2 haulers. Um, the blockade runner has a very small cargo hold, but it can fit a Covop's cloak, which means that it can warp around while cloaked, which is super cool and fun. Um, I'm also just now noticing that the DST and blockade runner images are backwards. Um, so the blockade runner is actually the picture under the DST and vice versa, but whatever. So next we have the deep space transport. The deep space transport has a fleet hangar, which increases uh, how much you can hold in that fleet hangar is determined by your skills in transport ships. So a lot of people train that to 4 because it gives you 60,000 meters cubed. If you train it to 5, it's 63.5K meters cubed, something like that. Um, so a lot of people train that to 4. It gives them 60,000 meters cubed, um, which is quite a bit. Um, and then beyond that, we have freighters. Freighters are big and can hold a lot. They're slow, but they're good. And then the T2 freighter is the jump freighter, which we're not going to talk about. The mechanics of jump freighters deserve their own class. They they don't behave like any of these other haulers. So, um, if you're interested in jump freightering, that's going to be a different class. Um, so, onwards. Sub 2 align or speed tank hauling. So, the general idea of speed tank hauling is to be aligning in sub 2, right? Which means that your align time is less than 2 seconds. And if it is less than 2 seconds, that makes it almost impossible to catch. This is also called an insta warp fit. Anything that's fit with sub 2 align is considered insta warp because you go from standstill. As soon as you hit warp, you go to warp. Um, this makes it useful for moving small items in small ships like the Synesis. You can also use shuttles, T1 frigates. You could use a Covop ship. You could use a Hecate or something like a faction, um, something like the Daredevil, right? I will say right now, don't use a shuttle. Um, There are people that make their money just blowing up shuttles that are carrying very expensive things. And shuttles are just so easy to blow up. It only takes one thrasher to do it. So I'm going to say right now, don't haul things that are valuable in a shuttle. Just don't do it. I don't care if it's a regular shuttle or a leopard. Um, the leopard warps very fast. Doesn't matter. Don't do it. It's really foolish, and sooner or later you're going to lose valuable things. Um, Now, why do people do this? Well, because it does not require a lot of skills to do it. Um, so, your first week of playing EVE Online, you can probably do speed tank hauling. Um, it's also useful for if you are carrying something that's um, valuable, that you don't want to carry in a regular hauler because it would make it a big target. The idea being that there is a better chance of you getting to where you want to go if you speed tank because people can't lock you up. Now, all that said, I keep saying it is almost impossible because it is almost impossible to lock up and catch a one of these speed tanking haulers, right? These little ships that go zoom zoom, right? It is almost impossible, but not entirely impossible. Because of the way server ticks work, it is possible to catch a sub to a line ship. It's very difficult, but entirely possible. Um, and then there's, of course, the more mundane things of, if you go through low sec in a speed tank hauler, um, you could get caught by smart bombs, right, in a gate camp. And there's not much you can do about that except not put yourself in that situation, because the smart bombs will blow you up and you just can't tank your ship enough to survive most smart bombing gate camps. Okay? Unless they're an absolute amateur at gate camping. So this is what the fits for a sub-tool line. So the first is the Synesis over here. It's fit up with tank in the mids. We've got inertial stabilizers in the lows for a line time, right? So that brings it under 2 seconds. And then we've got hyperspatials in the rigs, which gives it a faster warp time, right? So this warps at 7.82 AUs per second, and that's respectable, right? And it has a 1.55 second align time. On the right side is the Daredevil with implants, which is a sub 1 second align time. Okay, its align time is 0.987. There's nothing in the highs or mids. In the lows, you have um, you have pirate inertial stabilizers, and you have low friction nozzle joints in the rigs. So this is all align time stuff. And then you also have implants. Um, so this is the idea with the Daredevil is to further make it almost impossible to catch. At sub 1, essentially what is happening is that you are always going to be warping in the same tick, and in theory, that makes it impossible to lock up and blow up. Now, there's some real shenanigans with the game mechanics and how that works, how server ticks work, how inputs like locking up a target with an insta-locking ship and aligning and warping work that mean that you should not assume that you are 100% safe. You can assume that you are fairly safe and that it's why people spend, like this Daredevil fit, right, costs 1.9 billion, right? There's a reason why people are willing to pay nearly 2 billion for a aligned fit, right? It works. It works very well, but it is not foolproof. Okay. All right, T1 haulers. Now every Empire faction has their own T1 haulers. Um, they have one that is going to be fast, and they have one that carries a lot. Um, the cool thing about T1 haulers is that many empires have their own specialized version, uh, or like specialized haulers. So um, we've talked quite a bit about the um, in my other classes. I've talked about like how the Galente have um, they kind of sort of make their mark in terms of their haulers. So there's the Epithal, Miasmos, the Krios, but then of course there's things like the Hoarder. All of these are specialized T1 haulers that carry a specific cargo and have a cargo hold specific for um, hauling, uh, you know, a specialized cargo. So the epithal is going to be your PI, miasmos is ore, um, things like that. So they can be extremely useful, especially if you have your skills up. So like at level 5, the miasmos can hold 63,000 meters cubed in the ore hold, which is almost as much as a DST at max skills. So that's pretty impressive and super useful. Um, but again, they are extremely fragile, right? They cannot fit a lot of tank. They cannot fit a lot of tank at all. Um, and they will die very quickly. So I generally say in a T1 hauler, you really just want to go from one station to the next station in the same system, or maybe from like an asteroid belt or a moon belt to station, maybe from one system to the next system over, but you really don't want to do any sort of long hauling with T1 haulers. Um, you can do a few things to mitigate the chances of getting caught, of getting blown up. Um, you want to fit it up with tank. You can also put warp core stabilizers, which mean that that you're going to be able to pop that warp core stabilizer if you are caught, and then warp off anyway. Um, Again, that's not foolproof. Um, if you can put drones in your hauler, most of them can't, but if you can, use drones. EC300s are the ones to use because you can um, then jam out any scrams or points that are on you. And you could also use the MWD trick. If you've taken the Intro to Safe Traveling class or you've watched the recording, you know that I encourage people to practice the Cloak MWD trick and practice in a T1 hauler. Um, Obviously, that doesn't mean you go doing long distance hauling in a T1 hauler. I just mean warp from one gate in the same system to another gate, practicing, doing the MWD cloak trick. Um, and of course, the biggest thing is that if you are going to haul in a T1 hauler um, on these short distance hauls, don't carry a ton of valuable stuff in it, right? Don't use a T1 hauler to carry your entire BPO library from one station to another, um, because if you do that on the regular, people will notice and you will get blown up. All right, so now we're getting to the bread and butter of haulers, the deep space transport and the blockade runner. Um, Now, the blockade runner is a great ship. It is super, super useful, but it is more situational. The deep space transport is the workhorse of many a corporation, because, especially like Wormhole Corps, right, which is where I have, tons and tons of experience hauling stuff. I've hauled for Eve University using a deep space transport. I did corp courier contracts with deep space transports, hauling through JSpace. So, you know, the deep space transport really um, is worth its weight in gold. Um, the benefit of the deep space transport is that it can be tanked quite adequately. You can fit it from, on the low end, I've seen people with like 30 or 40K EHP, right, which is quite low. And then, on the high end, it's going to be like 100,000 EHP, right? So that's a tanky boy. Um, And as I mentioned, it has a fleet hangar, which at Transport Ships 4 is going to hold 60K meters cubed, which is quite generous. Um, it does tend to have a nasty align time. You can reduce that align time by cycling your prop mod for one cycle. So you activate your prop mod and then you turn it off before it does the second cycle. I generally actually set my prop mod on my DSTs to auto repeat off so that it by default only runs one cycle. And this is just, for my own well-being. It's basically doing a similar thing as the Cloak MWD trick, just without actually using a cloak. Speaking of which, you should put a cloak on your deep space transport. It does need to be the improved cloak, the improved cloaking device, because the prototype will not work for the MWD cloak trick. Now, the DST is inherently warp core stab. So if you were to put a warp core stabilizer on it, that would basically bring it up to 4 points of warp core stabilization, which means that if somebody wants to hold you in place with a scrambler or a point, they need either 2 scrams, 4 points, or 2 scrams and uh, 2 points just to hold you down. Um, and at that point it's a real pain in the butt. So you can make the deep space transport quite slippery if you are smart about it. Again, not foolproof, but really, really good. um, the blockade runner is significantly faster than the deep space transport. That align time that the deep space transport that I talked about, has its deep space transport very slow to align. Got to use the micro warp drive to get it to increase your align time. But with the blockade runner, you basically can hit warp and go. Um, as I said before, it does have a very small cargo hold. Um, so you're not going to be hauling large amounts of things, but if you have, some valuable cargo in there, um, you can get it around pretty quickly. Um, the um, the blockade runner's big claim to fame is that it can fit a Kovop's cloak, which allows it to warp while cloaked. And that's basically what it has for tank. Um, it cannot fit a bunch of tank. So the way to survive in a blockade runner is to always use your cloak. Um, and the reactivation time on the Kovop's cloak for the blockade runner is very short. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to be able to uh, cloak, warp, jump, and then cloak again um, once you're on the other side. It is easier to avoid gate camps. It is not entirely foolproof, but you are much more likely to get through a gate camp in a blockade runner than you are in a sub 2 line, especially where smart bombs are concerned. Um, so blockade runners are good, okay, even if they're more of a use case type ship than the deep space transport. So here's an example fit of a DST. It has almost 100k EHP. This is for the Impel. Um, the Impel is a particularly tanky DST. Um, and as you can see, it has an improved cloaking device. It has an interdiction nullifier in the highs. Um, this has a micro warp drive and an afterburner, right? So if you are a flying shield tank, you may not be able to fit both prop mods on there, um, but that gives you some options. If you do get tackled, you can. There is a chance that you can get off just using your afterburner. Um, and then it also has a warp core stabilizer, and the rest is tank, right? Um, Now, DSTs tend to be very tight on fitting. So in this example, um, it is basically maxed out on CPU and barely any room left on the power grid. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you don't have your fitting skills trained up, if you don't have your Magic 14 trained up, you might not be able to fit a DST properly. So that's something to keep in mind. You really want to train up your support skills in order to fly a DST properly. Um, Alternatively, you could fit an MJD on here. Um, I see a burst jammer, and I guess I can imagine some use cases where you might want a burst jammer. But the thing I will say about the burst jammer is if you fit a burst jammer on your DST, you are not going to be able to use the interdiction nullifier. Now, this might be fine if you are in high sec or low sec, um, and you are hauling with a DST. The burst jammer might be more valuable to you. I actually don't think you can activate the burst jammer in high sec, so this would be more like a low sec thing. But honestly, I haven't put a burst jammer on my DST since I first was able to fly a DST and didn't know, or actually back then, there were no interdiction nullifiers, so a burst jammer made more sense back then. But generally speaking, you don't want to fit a burst jammer if you're going to have an interdiction nullifier, because the burst jammer will make the interdiction nullifier not work. So, things to keep in mind. Now here are two different fits, two different ways of fitting. So the first one on the left is the active fit, right? So it's got the multi-spec hardeners and the EM hardener, right? So these are modules that you have to activate in order for them to work. It significantly increases your tank, but you do have to activate them for them to work. So it's going to rely on you being able to activate those modules if you get caught. And then on the right, we have the buffer fit, um, and there's nothing to activate there. It's just tank. In fact, as I'm looking at this, I'm noticing it doesn't even have a prop mod, which sounds super yikes. Um, but, there is the idea, I fly buffer fit, right? That's my DST fit of choice. Um, I used to fly active fit, um, but I have since been persuaded that the buffer fit is better, just because when you get caught, you might start to panic, and if you panic, you can spaghetti brain, which just means you start button mashing, and now you're not actually activating your shield modules the way you should. You're not you're not hitting that warp core stabilizer like you should, and suddenly, um, you know, you're caught and you're dying. So I prefer the buffer fit. It doesn't look like this one. This is like absolute brick tanked chunky boy type fit. I will also point out that this buffer fit is significantly more expensive, almost twice as much as the active fit. You don't have to go this extreme, um, but the approach here of having, the shield extender and the resist amplifiers to plug those resist holes is sound, right? But you're probably not going to do a brick tank fit like this, quite like this one. Um, so, um, so in my Intro to Safe Traveling class, we talk about the MWD cloak trick, and what can I say? Um, Basically, there are two things that you can do to make flying a DST less painful and safer. So the first is we talked about how the align time is really crap on a DST. So you run the prop mod 1 cycle, uh, which basically cuts the align time down by half. And then to increase the safety of flying your DST, you use the Cloak MWD trick, which I will explain here in a moment. Um, you jump the gate or the wormhole, then you align, activate your MWD, then turn on your cloak. Once your MWD is somewhere between 75 and 95% complete, um, you're going to deactivate your cloak, and you're going to button mash that warp button to where you're going. And if you do this properly, you should go from decloak to warp instantly. So essentially what it's going to look like to somebody else is you jumped into the system, you appeared for a second, cloaked, and then a couple seconds later you reappear and you're already warping. Um, if you do this properly, it is almost impossible to catch. And I'm speaking from experience here, um, trying to catch a DST. Um, if the pilot is good, it is very hard to catch. And I strongly, strongly recommend that you practice this because that's how you get good at it. Um, so definitely practice. If you practice, you will get better. The first, 10, 20, maybe even 30 times that you try it, you might screw it up. And even after you got it down, you can still make a mistake. Um, I definitely still make mistakes sometimes when I do the Cloak MWD trick. So it's definitely something you want to practice. Um, so, all right, freighters. Freighters are uh, the, one of the biggest hauling ships in the game. Um, they basically make make or break hauling in high sec because there is so much crap that has to get moved around New Eden, and freighters make it possible. Um, Now, freighters, you're only going to be using them in high sec. You don't take freighters into low sec or null sec, um, with some exceptions, right? I've definitely seen people um, take freighters into nullsec, but I've also blown up freighters in nullsec. So, you know, um, just be smart. You know, freighters make great suitcase ships. So, um, if you are moving from one system to another and you need to move all your ships and supplies, you might put them in a freighter and move them. And so in that way, I could see having a freighter in low sec or null sec for suitcasing purposes. But, you know, I mean, folks in Wormhole have freighters galore for that purpose and just for hauling, right? Um, Now, the other nice thing about freighters is that they can be tanked quite well. Um, so on the low end, you're going to have somewhere between 150 and 200,000 EHP. On the upper end, you're going to have somewhere between 500 and 600,000 EHP. The downside of freighters is that they are extremely slow to align. They are also slow to warp. As you can see, the warp time is 1.37 AUs per second, which is just ridiculously slow. But freighters can hold a metric crap ton of stuff, which makes them invaluable for moving large quantities of things around high sec. There are three ways to fit a freighter. Freighters, fun fact about them, um, they don't have any high slots or mid slots. They only have three low slots. So you can fit them for tank, you can fit them for cargo, and you can fit them for align time. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute here. Um, as a sort of breakdown of the different freighters, for the largest cargo hold, you want the Charon or the Charon. Um, for the best tank, you want the Obelisk, which is the Galente one. Um, for speed, you want the Fenrir. And I will point out that the Providence, while it is not top of the list for any of these three categories, it is sort of in the middle on all three, which makes it a good balanced option if you are um, if you are trying to decide. The Providence is a really good balanced option, whereas a lot of people favor the Charon because because it does hold so much, and some people prefer the Obelisk because it is so tanky. Um, so it's partly preference, um, but for example, my hauling tune can haul in an Obelisk or a Charon. So, you know, but all of them are valid. Uh, it just depends on what you're trying to do and what your preference is. Um, so this is the fitting. This is what the fitting looks like. So on the left here, this first one, we have an obelisk fit with reinforced bulkheads. This is the tank, right? This is the tank fitting, and you can fit any of the freighters this way. This is just an example, um, and the EHP is just shy of 600,000 EHP. Okay, that's massive. Absolutely massive. Um, so it would be really, really hard to kill this thing. Not impossible, mind you. In high sec, it's not impossible. It would just be a real pain in the butt to pull it off. So somebody would have to be extremely motivated to do so. On the right side, this second fitting is the cargo fit, right, with three expanded cargo holds. Now, when I've done hauling, I generally never fit all three expanded cargo holds. It was, I would go for the reinforced bulkheads and only put an expanded cargo hold on there if my cargo was so large that I couldn't do it with three expanded cargo holds, or reinforced bulkheads. So I'd add one of the expanded cargo holds, just one, if I needed it. But generally speaking, it's all tank, um, and you know, so um, but that is an option. Um, so with the full cargo, you can fit. I'm showing here 1.2 million meters cubed for cargo space. So that's just an absurd amount of cargo space, if you need that. And here's the align, right? So in the sorry, just got distracted for a second there. So um, with the Fenrir, right, the align time is going to be um, 21.1 seconds, and that's pretty speedy. I mean, that's basically DST levels of speed without using the micro warp drive. So, you can get it pretty speedy, but do pay attention to the fact that the tank is very low, right? This is just shy of 300 EHP, which is pretty low, um, at least low for a freighter. Um, so, you're still pretty beefy, but the the determined ganker will absolutely blow this kind of fit freighter up in a heartbeat. Now, if you're going to fly freighters, it's a good idea to consider implants, because implants can improve your ability to get around safely. So, a number of ways you can go with this. Um, Nomads will improve your align time. Ascendancies will improve your warp speed. Nirvanas improve your shield buffer. So you only want to use the Nirvanas if you're flying a Charon or a Fenrir. Um, Amulets improve your armor buffer. So that's going to be for the Obelisk or the Providence. And there's a number of hardwiring implants that you could also use. There's the SM706 for shield, the MC806 for hull, the HG1006 for armor, the EM706 for agility, which is going to be which is going to help with your align time and movement. And then there's the WS618, which is going to be your warp speed. Now, um, you could in theory, use the Nomad or Ascendancy set and then add on the something like the MC806 for um, improving your align time or warp speed, and then adding a little tank on top of that with your implants. Um, do be mindful that these implant sets do get expensive. Um, Now, if you can afford a freighter, I'm assuming you can probably afford an implant set, and it might seem like, why would I buy an implant set? The freighter was already expensive enough. But the logic behind having an implant set like this, even though um, they do get expensive from time to time, um, the thinking is that if you're going to invest that much money into a single ship, you might as well make sure that it survives as long as possible. And having implants for your freighter is a really good way of increasing your survival rate, and also just making your life flying a freighter a little less painful. So, okay. I don't know why this slide is before everything else on Weber's, but okay. So, um, I've kind of gone on and on about how the align time sucks on a freighter. So one thing that people do is um, they will fit up a ship for webbing. And if you're not familiar with this mechanic, webbing actually reduces your align time, or at least it reduces your overall um, time that it takes to get to warp. And the reason for this is your when you're aligning, what's basically happening, visually it's represented by, pointing you in a specific direction, right? Um, but what's also happening is that you're working your way up to your max velocity. And in order to jump to warp, you need to be at 75% maximum velocity. So when you are webbed down, what happens is you bring the overall maximum speed of the ship significantly down. And when you do that, it means that your ship doesn't have to get at to, a significantly higher rate anyway. Over on over on the left side, this first fitting, we have a crewer that's been fit with a Fed Navy stasis web, um, and a T2 stasis web. Um, and then it's got hyperspats or hyperspatial rigs to get around quickly. On the right side, this second fitting is the hyena. Um, I don't see many crewers used for webbing. I don't know, you know, I mean, I guess you could, but why would you do that when you can use a hyena? Okay, honestly, the real here, um, if you cannot fly a hyena, use a Vigil Fleet issue. It would be my recommendation. Um, the Vigil Fleet issue is the faction version of the Vigil. The Vigil is the T1 version of the hyena. The Vigil Fleet issue and the hyena both get bonuses for webs, so that's why they are generally used. Um, and you only need Minmatar Frigate 2 to be able to use a Vigilant Fleet issue. So, you know, at the very least, do yourself a favor and use a ship that gets good bonuses for webbing. So, um, the hyena is not fit much differently. We have 3 stasis webs. Um, we have hyperspats in the rigs to improve warp time. In the lows, we have signal amplifiers, and that's going to improve lock time. Now, your Weber is going to be doing double duty here. Essentially, what's going to happen is your Weber is going to jump in, peek around in the system ahead of your freighter. Then you're going to warp the Weber to a ping or a tactical, and that tactical should be a ways off from the gate, preferably 200 to 400 K off the gate. Yes, my presentation says 250K meters cubed off the gate, but that's wrong. It just needs to be 250K meters. It just needs to be within warpable distance, right? And you can't work or you can't warp if you're less than 150 kilometers off the gate. So you do want to be on grid though, so don't warp to a station with your Weber and then, like just think that you're gonna sit in station until the freighter gets there, or like sit on tether on a structure. Don't do that. Stay on grid. You want to be able to see your hauler. Um, Once you've taken a look at local with your Weber, you've made sure that there's no funny business going on. Jump the hauler in, right? And then while your freighter still has jump cloak, you're going to warp to your freighter. So that means that you do need to be in your own little fleet with the freighter and the Weber together. And once the Weber has landed, you can start aligning with the freighter. Um, in HiSec, you're going to need to request a duel. Um, and once that duel starts, you can get the Weber, you can put the webs on, and the freighter will just go. Now, that is a bit of a complicated set of steps, which means that you should practice it, right? Just like the MWD cloak trick, practice webbing. Um, Honestly, I used a Weber for a while, and I will still use a Weber in certain systems where it's particularly spicy to bring a freighter through, but I don't use a Weber on the regular. Like, I don't use a Weber all the time for every system. I think you would, I know some people probably do, but I think you would wear yourself out having to do all those steps um, in every system, especially if your routes are, 10 jumps or more. It gets really tedious really fast. Now, as a general rule, you want to have your dual setup to auto reject on your hauling pilot. Um, so the hauling pilot will need to um, be the one that sends a dual request if you're doing the freighter webbing combo. Um, you want to make sure that your safeties are green because you don't want to go suspect in your freighter or your DST, right? Um, don't put something stupid on your freighter. Like, there are expensive versions of, the reinforced bulkheads. Um, don't don't do that. Don't do that. It's just silly. Um, Freighters are already kind of a target because they are basically flying pinatas. Um, so if you put bling on your freighter, if you put expensive modules, if you use expensive variations on modules, you're just making it that much more of an attractive target. Do consider using implants. Now, if you don't, it's fine. Um, I if you don't, that's totally fine. That's your choice. But do consider using implants. At least give it a thought. Um, and then use bookmarks. Use Instadocs. Um, my presentation says you don't use Insta undocs for freighters. I do anyway. Um, and I if I had to guess, I would have to talk to our manager of the hauling department about why he thinks that freighters should not use Insta undocs. But if I had to guess, one of the things that can happen in trade hubs, especially JITA, is that you get bumped off. And if you waste time um, going for an Insta undock in a freighter, there is a good chance that you're going to just be perpetually bumped around. And now you're just wasting time. Because yes, you can be bumped if you're just going for your outgate. Um, but you know, you're just adding more steps, creating more chances um, to get ganked, making yourself that much more of an enticing target. Um, but like I said, I still use Insta Undocs with my freighter um, because I don't like my freighter just sitting there aligning for 40 seconds. It just feels way too uncomfortable. Um, but, that's up to you. All right, I'm gonna sound like a broken record at this point. Freighters, do not align fast. So prepare for, if you're planning to haul in a freighter, um, have a good snack and your favorite beverage. Um, be prepared for things to take a while. Um, be smart about, you know, plan accordingly, right? Um, so if you are thinking about like having different configurations of your fit, right? So if you're using all tank, but you may sometimes use the all cargo, you're going to need to have those expanded cargo holds in your cargo hold. Wow, that that sounds weird. Okay, so let me try this one. Let's say you want the align refit. So you're going to put those inertial stabilizers in your cargo hold and you need to keep them with you. Um, Generally speaking, you want to use reinforced bulkheads as much as possible, and you only swap to expanded cargo holds if you can't fit everything in the freighter. Um, and I never use the align time. I never use the align time fit. I'm sure plenty of people do, but not me. Never. Um, Use a Weber, and your Weber makes a great scout. And this is generally just going to be an alt. So you are going to be doing a little multi-boxing here. If you have a really nice and patient friend who will be your Weber scout, great. But most people do not have that patience, even if they are a good friend. Um, if you are thinking about trying to do this for money, right? Um, your your ability to move quickly is going to be what determines uh, your money, right? How much money you make, because the more runs that you can do, the more money you make, right? I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure this is true of trucking in the real world. Um, do keep in mind that every time I have said, you know, it's really tanky or almost impossible to kill, things like that, or really, really hard to kill, that does not mean impossible to kill. And especially with freighters, which have so much tank, it can feel like you're invincible sometimes, but you're not. And anyone with half a brain who wants to kill you can kill you, and they will. Um, so please do not get it in your head that you are invincible just because you fit all tank and you're using a Weber and you know it's just not a good idea to get overconfident. Now, if you really, really like hauling or you want that to be a big part of your play style, you can join corporations that do it for a profit. The two big ones are going to be Red Frog and PushX. Both of those corporations um, are massive logistical um, corporations that provide hauling, um, and they're pretty great. Um, and they provide hauling for all of New Eden, really. Like if you need something moved and you can't move it yourself, and you don't have people who can move it for you, Red Frog and PushX will probably do it for you. So, um, they both have websites that explain the rules and how they work and can get you set up, with a contract so that you can get stuff moved out. All right. To go over skills some, for the DST, you need to train the Empire faction hauler of choice to 5. Um, and then you will want transport ships 4 at the least. Anything lower than that, and you're kind of defeating the purpose of flying a DST because the fleet hangar um, increases size based on your skills in transport ships. So um, you are going to need to get your support skills up. So mechanics 5, thermodynamics 4. Meh, it's a good idea to have thermodynamics, but um, thermodynamics 4, I don't think okay, that's not true. I have overheat my modules before, but honestly, mm, anyways, train thermodynamics. Warp drive operation 4, I'm gonna actually disagree with that. I'm gonna say 5. Train it to 5. Um, your the warp time or the warp speed of a DST is not nearly as atrocious as the freighter, but it is still pretty bad. And why put yourself through that suffering? Um, I would honestly recommend training it to 5. Um, because honestly, if you're training into T2 ships, you should have a lot of these support skills at 5 anyway. Um, and warp drive operation is one of them. Um, you need at least cloaking 3 for the DST. For the blockade runner, you're going to need cloaking 4 to use the Kovops cloak, but um, cloaking 3 to use the improved cloaking device. That's the T2 cloaking device. You cannot get away with a prototype cloaking device. It's just not going to work. Um, Hull upgrades 4, shield management 4, tactical shield manipulation 4, and your compensation skills to 4. So that's going to be armor or shield, depending on what you're flying. You need those compensation skills up to 4. Um, my presentation says at least 3, preferably 4. Yes, get them to 3, but continue training them to 4 is what I would say, right? Um, you're I would say that like you're really not getting much benefit at 3, but it's better than not having them trained, right? And then at 4 is when you really actually start to see um, numbers go up, as the gamers say. For freighters, um, you need your Empire faction hauler of choice to level 3. You need advanced spaceship command 5. Um, and then you want to train freighter 2, 3, or 4. You're also going to need mechanics 5 and hull upgrades or shield management 4. Honestly, just train them both. To 4, it's not a bad train. Just train them both. Um, Another big component of hauling is intel. You need to you need to be using Zkill and Eve Gate Check. Um, Z Zkill is not quite as helpful um, because Eve Gate Check will provide you with links to Zkill. Um, so I would honestly start with Eve Gate Check, and if you see anything funny, uh, you can click the Zkill board link, and it'll tell you what's what. Um, when you are scouting, like with your webbing alt, look for anything red or yellow. If there's a yellow flashy in local, if you see those flashing skulls, you know there's trouble. Do use dscan because even if there's nothing on grid with you, if you see, 12 tornadoes or, a fleet of Taloses, that's probably a sign that there's a ganking fleet getting ready to go, or nearby. Also, just familiarize yourself with locations where ganks frequently happen. So, um, this is going to be, this tends to be, at least in high sec, it tends to be point 0.5 systems like Udama, like Ball. Um, there's a couple of them around Mar, right? And I'm just blanking on their names at the moment. But it's generally going to be point 0.5 systems along the route to the major trade hubs. Um, in low sec, it's going to be places like Abazon. It's going to be places like Tama is a big one, right? That's a very popular um, gate camping location. Um, Typically on the Norvikaken gate on the way to Jita. Um, what are some other ones? Vicamia is another place where ganking happens a lot in low sec. Um, Specifically because if you tell your route planner to avoid Abazon, it'll route you through Vicamia. Um, okay, so another thing to keep in mind is that you can go on Twitch, and there's a whole bunch of different Twitch channels covering EVE Online, right? People play EVE Online and they stream it, right? But you can also use that to gather intel. Um, so there's a Twitch channel called Udama Scout, which keeps track of all the ganking hotspots, right? So that's a good intel channel that you can use to see if your route is clear. But also, sometimes these gankers actually stream themselves ganking, and like that's a thing that you can pay attention to. So be sure to check Twitch because it absolutely will, give you some useful information about what's going on. Okay, so let's talk about ganking. So, um, gankers take a lot of things into account, just as you take a lot of things into account to safely haul. Um, Ideally, what you're doing is you're making yourself the most difficult target on the grid in any given system. So, there are a number of different ways to go about this. So, first is make yourself hard to lock. If you are using a Weber, that makes it that much harder to lock onto you because they don't have as much time to lock onto you. Use the Cloak MWD trick with your DST so they don't have an opportunity to lock onto you. And use a Warp Core stab so that they can't hold you in place. Um, you can also go the tank route, and obviously you want to do all that you can. So it's not an either or thing, it's an all of the above type thing. Um, you want to fit as much tank as you can. Um, and so you're gonna use as much tank as possible, and that's why I keep saying, generally speaking, you don't want to do like the all three expanded cargo hold on your freighter. You just use the number of expanded cargo holds you need for the cargo that you're carrying, and the whole idea is, at least in high sec, that when you are attacked, you can survive a gank. And that's the whole idea, right? Because Concord will come and they will kill the gankers. All you have to do is survive long enough for that to happen. Um, the idea is that you are not worth killing, right? You're too much work. The tank will uh, the tank will outlive the ganker's attempt, and the loot that drops is only going to be, you know, around 50%. So given that, you know, uh, some gankers might do a little math. Now, I don't think in math, but there's the equation if you want to think through that. I don't think in math. The way I think of this is any cargo of significant value is worth it to a ganker. The only thing that you can do is make it hard for a ganker to actually get that loot, to get your cargo. And one of the ways you do that is you are just really dang tough to kill, to the point where they just can't get enough ships on grid to actually successfully pull off the gank. Um, Also, managing how much you are actually carrying, right? So, maybe don't haul 50 billion in your DST, right? Take a couple trips, right? It's not worth losing 50 bill, because it's just not worth it. Um, ideally, ideally, you're only carrying enough that if the gankers were to actually successfully gank you, they would have spent way more in trying to gank you than what they got out of the gank. And at that point, it's not about money, it's just about mining salt, right? So that is intro to hauling. If you have questions, you can leave them as a comment to this video, and I will try to answer as many of them as I can. Can't promise to get to all of them. Otherwise, be sure to like and subscribe and share with friends who are interested in hauling in EVE Online. And until next time, I wish you all the best. Fly safe, my friends.